Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion. Second hour, something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about green screen, shooting green screen specifically. The last week, we were supposed to do it once. So many questions, we didn't even get to the examples. And so we're going to talk about that and look at behind the scenes, talk about some math, but it's simple math, nothing complicated. So we'll be dealing with that in the second hour. So get those questions in. And then tomorrow, our second hour is going to be working with remote lighting. So Tlaloc, in our group, has Lopez Waterman has basically, he's running lights on our stage from his home. And so he's going to talk about how he's doing that. Should be a great second hour. So check that out. And you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. The whole schedule's up there and some of the highlights. And there's a lot of great stuff there. So check it out. All right, let's jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
The first one this morning comes from the Seventh Scroll in Brooklyn, New York. And he says, morning, guys. For Roughly and Alex, what router is the panel using to route their Dante setups? We would rather buy once, cry once, if possible.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I haven't hooked mine up yet, but I bought the Netgear 8-port. Buy the more powerful of the two because you're going to want to use PoE if you're using Dante, unless you've got a injector, but it just seems to make sense to use a PoE router or
I'll go ahead, Jason.
The best kept secret about Dante that isn't a secret at all is that you don't need a router. Get your own switch and it will actually work natively if it's the correct thing. It can do all of its own kind of routing, but Ubiquiti's pretty good.
The other thing I would think about is that the only reason you want a router is you want to build a VLAN for your Dante signals. So in a perfect world, they're not sharing the rest of the connections with whatever else you're doing. The other thing is I would agree with Mitchell that a PoE is really important because there's little things that you may want to do that are specific to, like for instance, I use Bluetooth. We'll talk about this in the near future here on these questions. That I use a Dante to Bluetooth, and I also use Dante to my little 205, and both of those require PoE. So having some PoE outputs is pretty powerful. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida is next. He says, can anyone recommend a free telephone app for Mac OS? I need to send desktop audio to Twitter Spaces, which requires audio only by phone. Thanks.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Free? No. It's unfortunately there's no way to do it because a lot of the companies, what they have to do is they have to switch that over to a PBX style system. So you're going to have to pay for something. Even if it did over the internet, then on the other end of it, it would still be going through digitally and you still wouldn't be able to connect up to there. With that said, I still have my Magic Jack if you want to borrow it and use it for a year. Other than that, the one thing that I would highly recommend, and I know everybody's going to cringe here, but Skype still has a great audio service, and you can do it for $30 a year. You can do a dial-in service and use it that way.
Yeah, one of the things that we had this issue with Clubhouse, and this isn't a free solution, but it worked very well, which is that we used one of the Audinate Dante to Bluetooth. And so it shows up as a Bluetooth headset to the phone. And it's just a little pill that you just plug into the end of a PoE Ethernet. And what that allows you to do is it just shows up and you get great audio and you can route anything in your system to your audio platform. And this is a way to basically, and I got to tell you, I was jumping into other people's clubhouses with that system and invariably someone stopped and said, how are you doing that? You sound way different because I was using a big radio mic with a good mixer and all the things that come with that and pumping that straight into Clubhouse, and they weren't clear of how that actually was working. And so I think it'll work with Spaces as well. We like to find ways to short circuit stupid business models. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Angry Audio has a cool box too that'll talk Bluetooth to your iPhone.
Yeah. The reason that they're doing this is a attempt to keep people on the same playing field. That what they don't want is to do exactly what I just said, which is create what we call expectation inflation, where people suddenly start sounding way better than everyone else or looking way better. This is why Instagram tries to keep you on your cell phone. This is why, and it's just it stymies the platform. And I will admit that I was part of the problem with Hangouts. We would put $500,000 of hardware and then pump it into a Hangout, and people then couldn't figure out how to do it like that. And then they didn't, some of the brands were frustrated because they felt like they couldn't live up to the expectation. But I think that we should get people to move up rather than, be dealing with lowest common denominator. So our job is to make that audio work better. And I think now after this question, I'm going to tweet out the solution for that. All right. Next question.
Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland up next. How do you help on-screen talent talk to the camera? Monitor on top of the lens or teleprompter sounds good, but who controls the speed of the script? If it's talent, is that not a distraction? Also, what apps would you recommend for iPhone or iPad? Thanks.
Go ahead, David.
Well, from my brief experience being talent on set, I had the pleasure of Roscoe Jones was floor manager, and he was telling me which camera to look at out in the desert, and we did Hour of Happy. The O&Os, though, that I've noticed on local newscasts, a lot of the talent there, that you'll usually see them fiddling with like a jog wheel. I think Contour Shuttle makes one that's been rebranded by AutoScript, etc. And then they'll be able to drive the speed at which they're reading on their own.
Can you describe to people what an O&O is?
Oh no, that's a industry term for owned and operated. So yeah, it's the smaller segment markets. It might not be a fully branded 3-letter station. They might get content from one of us.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I'd suggest hiring a teleprompter operator that comes with their own equipment and operates the teleprompter. There are, of course, to save money, a lot of O&O stations, as David just said, have the on-screen talent run their own teleprompter to save some money. And that's great if you're doing news where you never have to go back, you never have to start over again or, move around within the script or find your place. If you're just scrolling one story, the next story, and the next story, that's fine. If you're doing live. If you're doing scripted content where you're going to jump around, it really helps to have an operator. There is software out there now that can supposedly take an audio input and scroll the text based on audio recognition of your voice recognition. That can be problematic if you're trying to do, let's say, a series of tags that are all different but start the same, because it can't tell which tag you're reading, et cetera, et cetera. So in that case, you're going to need an operator that can keep track of the script and can go back, and you can drop bookmarks in to go instantly to different tags or different scripts, and it really speeds up production quite a bit that way. And as far as an iOS or iPhone, iPad software, there aren't too many ones that are great. People Prompter has some that you can get for running on iOS that might work for you.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
On the low end, and of course I'll represent the low end, I use a home stream from iCan. It's this little guy right down here, and it fits on the front of the lens on the camera, very much like a matte box would. And for script reading, not sure I'd use it because it's kind of small unless you're up close and personal. But you're looking directly at the lens, and that's the object. A monitor above is still going to cause them to have that flirty eye look when they're trying to read.
Go ahead, Bill. Sorry, Bill. I muted you because you had your mic open.
Sorry about that. For the last few years, I have used Teleprompt Plus, and it's an iOS app. It's worked pretty flawlessly for me. The nice thing about it, it's full enough featured so that you can use an iPhone to trigger an iPad, which often goes on the prompter. So it has those kind of wireless capabilities. Pretty easy to edit in the field. Most of these iPad or iPhone iOS solutions are not full-fledged, and so you're not getting the kind of absolute super easy to go in and edit in a hurry that a professional prompter operator would use. But for me, when I've been on prompter and I've been trying to read a prompter into a camera, the most important thing to me is just the ability to pause, because I'm pretty fluid at reading. So I would try to keep the current piece as close to the top as possible. And the most important thing for me is if I get interrupted or I have to make an off comment, to just be able to stop the prompt roll in order to interject something and then start it up again. I don't usually do much more than that. And I also will have set the prompter to my natural reading speed. So I find it pretty easy to do, but other people have a lot of difficulty with it.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So for a lot of times, especially when it comes to virtual talent, that they don't have teleprompters. So the best thing to do is have a monitor, get some sort of monitor, maybe a TV right behind them, and yeah, you might see a little left and right. But what I like to do is I like to go right, have them put the box right above the camera lens. Usually it's some of the teleprompter software, they'll have little lines where you're going to be reading at. And then I like to push that up so there's one line underneath so they can kind of read forward to the next line, but not too much. And then we judge whether it's going too fast, too slow for them. And I find that that's usually the best line. Like right now I have my, on Zoom, I have my box set up so I can actually look at Alex's eyes while I'm talking through that little black void. And I tell them that this is the little black void, and I talk to them in the little black void so they can have a name to it, and they can see, and then they can kind of associate that's where they have to look.
Yeah, I have a prompter operator for anything that matters. So anything I'm getting paid to do, like if someone's going to have an address, I'm going to have an operator there. And because all the things that Courtney talked about is that it's not about moving the text up and down. It's about someone editing in real time going, oh, that didn't work. And there's somebody who's managing that, and they're keeping track of it, and they're keeping track of where you were, and they're stopping and starting when you need to. And it becomes fluid. And it's usually not me doing it as talent. It's someone who doesn't do this all the time. And you need to make it fluid, and you want someone who does this all the time. That is the only way to get that to work. So anything that matters. Now for at home, when I have to do some read, I can't afford usually to have that. And I use, I think it's Prompt Smart. And it's one of the ones that Courtney was talking about, which is an AI based one. So basically it just follows me along as I talk. So I just sit there and I can just start talking. And if I stop talking, it'll stop. If I start talking, it goes, and it runs pretty well. It does a little bit of a jump that I don't, as someone who's seen a lot of prompter operators, I don't like the way the smart prompt works, and then it jumps to the next line that I need rather than slowly moving to it, which is part of the problem there, but it does work for me. The problem with it is the editing process is pretty painful. So you have to kind of, the way that they, and this is funny because they've got a great technology just poorly implemented in the one place that I need it. So while I'm writing, it's very hard for me to go and edit a couple words. So I kind of have to go out of it and then back into it. And it's a little bit, that mode is not great, but it's pretty good for a cost-effective way to do it. Next question.
The next one comes from Daniel Goldstein in Washington, D.C., and he says, Frame.io was bought by Adobe some months ago. Has anyone noticed the resulting changes to end users?
Go ahead, Bill.
So I've been using Frame for a few years. I was a little trepidatious when Adobe picked them up because it had been such a great solution in my Final Cut world, and I was hoping they didn't do something to mess that up. They have not. It still works fine for me. I will say I'm hearing more grumbling on the web about some aspects of it since then, but I haven't experienced any of those. I know some of the people at Frame, and they're great people, and they're still there in Adobe. I will assume that they're going to spend more time working on the Adobe version of it than some of the other implementations, just because they own it and they should. I mean, that's their property. But I haven't noticed anything that's been in my way for using it the way I've traditionally used it up to this point.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
I'm a prolific Adobe user, as some people probably already know. And since they integrated it into everything, it's just not part of my workflow yet. So, perhaps down the road I'll get used to it, but the answer is no. I haven't been taking advantage of it.
I say I use Frame every day. I don't use a lot of Adobe products every day, but I use Frame every day, and it still has the same weird limitations that it had before, and I haven't seen it add any to that. So it's I haven't seen it got better or worse at the moment. It's just the same, extremely useful but quirky and weird about the way the billing works. But outside of that, it's fine. Next question.
Graham Cardwell is up next from Belfast, Northern Ireland. We're at the start of a conversation about a camcorder at this sort of price point. And then he mentions the Sony HXR NX200 or Panasonic HC X1E. So those are the price points he's talking about. What are the features that would steer you toward or away either of these two cameras?
Go ahead, Courtney.
They're fairly similar. They're in the same price range. I think both of them have a non-interchangeable lens, and the lens is lens and optical block are part of the camera. That I ran into a problem with that. I had an old Panasonic HMC 150 back in the day, and somebody dropped it or bumped it, and the back focus skipped out. The one of the little plastic gears changed, and so I took it to a Panasonic the factory authorized repair center in Irvine or something, where there was Panasonic really. And they had it for about 3 weeks and said, well, the only way to fix it is to replace the entire sensor and optical block, and that would cost, $2,600, and it was a $2,300 camera. So if they have plastic internal parts, and that's one thing I really don't like. The fact that it's a non-interchangeable lens does give you faster automatic focus and auto iris and everything. All that stuff works automatically quite well. And as long as it's fast enough and has enough zoom to do the job for what you need, just bear in mind that you won't be changing to a different lens.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I'm a big fan of Sony's Exmor R sensor. Since they're both 1-inch sensors, that's where I would go on that. But I think that their cameras don't do 60 frames at 4K. I think it's only 30 frames, but I might be wrong. I still have to check on all the specs. But I know with the Panasonic, you can definitely do 60 frames at 4K if that's what you're looking for.
I go with John. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, sorry about that. I would prefer the Sony. I like the image better. I also like that it has a SDI out. So if you're bringing it into any sort of switcher, long cable runs, definitely going to be a much better solution for you.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Big fan of if you could bump it up to a Sony ZV E10. The difference addresses the issue that Courtney just mentioned, which is a removable lens, because I've got a 20 millimeter on there, and I bought the additional audio interface. So it's a Sony ZV E10.
And I think that what I would say is that I started on Sony. What was the X1? Is it the little handy cam that they had?
XL1, I think.
XL1. No, that's a Canon.
Canon.
I can't believe I can't remember it because I had a lot of these. So I had a bunch of Sonys.
Z1 or something like that.
Yeah, it wasn't a Z1. It was something else anyway. So it was and what? Sorry, say it again, Courtney.
I think it was an EX3 something.
Oh yeah, I had 3 EX1s and 1 EX3. So that was kind of and the EX3 gave us the interchangeable lens and a bunch of other things. And I will say that then we moved to Canon. That we got into the Canon Mark IIs, and shot lots of stuff with that, and still used the EXs. And then we had some bigger Sony cameras, and then we went to Blackmagic cameras. And what I will say is that you just have to really think about the use case for a camcorder. That's what I would say is these all-in-one camcorders were something that's kind of like, if you're going to do news gathering, they make sense because they've got a lot of bits and pieces and they've got little things outside. But if you really want something to look good, number one is it has to be able to shoot raw video, and number two, it has to have LUTs. So if it doesn't have those things, I won't buy them. And you can buy those at that price at this point with something like a Blackmagic 6K. The Blackmagic 6K is going to produce video quality that is 10 times what these camcorders do. So if you want to, if you just need run and gun, and it doesn't matter, then these are probably all reasonable. But that's what they are. You just have to know that you're building them for run and gun. And if you're not doing that, then you might want to think about your camera choices. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with, what have your experiences been with CodeWithChris as a way to learn iOS development? Would iOS development be a marketable skill with remote positions available?
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I think iOS it's a coming thing. I would suggest that if you just want to get your feet wet, Swift Playground is a thing that Apple has done that makes it super easy to get into the very beginnings of learning the kind of structural programming that can work to develop simple iOS applications and start your skill sets. I think it's free, and there's tons of resources because Apple's strongly behind it. And then iOS development, I think this idea of people carrying their devices with them has swept the world, and it's never going to go away. So if you have solid skills in iOS development after 10, 15, or even 2 or 3 years of study, I would think that would make you highly marketable.
Yeah, there's a couple things there. So number one is I've used a lot of Swift Playgrounds. That's how I got kind of playing with it. And then I moved to CodeWithChris, and I found that the CodeWithChris was a lot better, in my opinion. It costs more. It costs more than Swift Playgrounds, infinitely more, because as Bill said, Swift Playgrounds is free. But you're building apps that are much closer to the real world than Swift Playgrounds very quickly. Like from day one, you're building this little game and you're putting these things together. And he's very good at applied programming on getting things. You're building something that actually does something very, very quickly. Whereas Swift Playgrounds, it's a little bit slower on the roll, and I got bored. So that was the problem that I really had with it. And I admit I have a very short attention span. So anyway, so I think that's one consideration there. I feel like his stuff is very approachable, and it's a pretty great platform for learning that stuff. And so I would recommend that. As far as marketable skills, the most marketable you can be if you're learning iOS by yourself, in my opinion, is to think of your own apps or work with someone who's got ideas and build the apps for them. The real problem you're going to have with marketability is there's a big difference between someone who's learning to code and someone who understands how to integrate code into a large code base with a lot of programmers. That takes, like real training, and it takes real lifting. It's not something that if you're hacking stuff together for your own apps, a company like Apple or Google is not looking for those folks. They're looking for people who really understand, checking stuff in, checking stuff out, managing code bases, commenting, all those, understanding the overall architecture of the system. Another thing you want to look at is grow with Google. So if you're looking at Google has basically given up on the universities to supply them with what they need. So this is the beginning of them basically short-circuiting that entire system and starting to go directly to everyone to make sure. And that's, I believe, a free solution or a really low-cost solution. And their certifications will work across the board. So that's another one to look at. But building iOS apps, I've been, between all my other jobs, I see a lot of people I know a lot of people who just sat down, took some classes, wrote the app that was in their head, and are making a good living wage. Like I had some friends that they hired a programmer to do it, and it just did something really simple. I won't call it out, but it was a really simple thing. And for years they made, $50,000 a month. Like just it's, like and it was just came in. They didn't update it. They didn't do anything else. It just sat in the app store. Not all of the apps work that way, but if you hit the right mark, it's one of the best places to make money. It really is the most amazing marketplace in existence at the moment, to be able to be anywhere in the world and be able to have the potential of making, a good living without any overhead or anybody hiring you. Go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to also add that if you're just interested in looking around at how deep it can get, the Worldwide Developers Conference that Apple does every year, there's one coming up, I think, in a month or two or three, has lots of iOS development modules that you can just go into for free, look around, see if it groks with you, it makes any sense. And those are some of the best on the planet because they literally write the code that runs the whole thing.
Right. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, Twitter provides a social narrative or story story describing how spaces work in a simple way. And he's got a link there. That is a common technique used with those on the spectrum. Could you see more app makers doing this?
And I have to admit, I haven't had the time to look at what this a simple way. Yeah, I don't quite understand what the question is. I think is the problem that I have here. And since we don't have any hands raised, I'm not sure. It's nice and straightforward. I think that's all I can say. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So the only thing that I can say on that is, it is nice and straightforward, but it's nice and straightforward for one person, but for another person, it might be a TLDR situation. So it's really going to depend on what the company, what their tech writers are going to write up, what the HR is going to approve, and what they're going to post on the screen. So, and of course, we'll probably even be seeing this because some breaking news: Elon Musk just joined the board on Twitter.
There you go. Next question.
Nathan Cashin in Oregon City, Oregon says, what do panelists think of a beginner freelancing on Upwork and the like to get experience and build skills, audio, video, editing, presentation, design, and so forth, particularly when Alex-style spec experiments is beyond my budget?
Go ahead, John.
I think any place you can get experience is going to be great. Digging in and doing it is going to be the best type of work that you can do. If you're lucky enough to get paid for it while you learn, that's even better.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, John. Oh, sorry, Courtney.
Find somebody who's doing that professionally in your neck of the woods and offer to assist them for free. That way you can learn from someone who has a lot of experience, and you get on-set experience or in editing suite experience, just being a fly on the wall, looking over their shoulder and watching them do their job, and then taking care of the menial tasks that they don't want to take care of, to help them out a little bit. You can absorb a lot by being an apprentice to somebody who's really skilled.
And that's exactly how I got into radio. I walked in and said, I'll sweep the floors for free. And 2.5 years later, I was music director, morning show host, and assistant program director. so at this radio station, because I got in, I didn't have an attitude about it. I just did what needed to get done. I did it efficiently and I did it well. I put in unbelievable hours. My first voiceover that I didn't charge for Act 1 limousine service, our stretched informal limousines add Cadillac sophistication to any occasion. The reason I can still remember that after 30 years is because I did it 200 times. Like, it was like one little thing was wrong and one little whatever, and I just crafted that thing, and it was the first one. But I spent a whole weekend doing one 30-second commercial because I'd never done one before. And I came out and I did it, and then suddenly I was doing ads all the time. And then I had a business doing ads. And what I needed was, to your point, access to the hardware, access to people who knew what they were doing. I walked into the reseller for Electric Image and Form Z and After Effects and said, I don't know how to use any of these things, but I'll answer your calls for free if you just let me spend my afternoons here for free. And because I couldn't, Electric Image at the time was $7,500 and Form Z was $3,500 and After Effects was $3,500. I just needed access to the computer, with the dongles, the ADB dongles on them. And I parlayed that into a job at ILM. In Lucasfilm. So the thing is that, the key though is that you have to get in when you're helping someone, you still have to be reliable. You treat it like you're getting paid what you want to get paid down the road, not like you're doing somebody a favor. The best way to burn up this is to say that you're going to do something and help for free and then don't show up or don't be reliable or be a pain in the neck when you're there, or, all the other things. You just want to play really hard. And basically, to Courtney's point, everything I've done something like that. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, what Alex refers to in the radio business being a gopher. You go for this, you go for that, and if you come in with an attitude, you're not gonna get the next job, because it's surprising how fast, if you show the will and the way to invest your time, that you're going to get a real job. It happens quickly.
I won't be so rough about it, but I think there's been discussion recently. 90% of the people that are doing pretty much everything aren't super good at what they do, and so if you are, and if you endeavor to get better faster, usually, especially in the entertainment industry, I found that you could cut through it like a hot knife through butter. So all you have to do is do hard work and apply yourself. Next question.
Simon Ray in Shrewsbury in the UK says, what is your advice for best practices in labeling cables so that you can quickly identify which of the many cables on your desk or patch panel is connected to a given device? Do you use resistor style color coding, he wonders?
Go ahead, David.
When it comes to labeling cables, I go with a name you can trust. Brady Labelers. Brady Labelers are the best cable labelers in the business.
They bring that limousine-like sophistication.
Yeah, but in all seriousness, best advice is to label both ends, whatever method you want to do. If it's color coding, is one. With bigger looms that will do, it's usually numeric. So depending if it's a patch panel 0, start with 0-001, 2, 3, 4, etc. Label both ends. And if you want to use color-coded cables, I've seen those in patch panels. So we know what's video, what's audio kind of thing. But Brady is a name you can trust.
Go ahead, Danny.
Again, it depends on how many cables you have on each end. So one quick visual way of picking up which cable goes to which end is, again, I use colored zip ties, because you have endless possibilities. Because you have to think about it, every cable, at times, they are not all the same. So you have another identifier on top of the colored zip ties.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
I hate to disappoint my brother from another mother, but I use the brother P-Touch, and I always go from. So that when I'm looking at the other end, which is usually the end I have to mess with, I know where it came from. That's the issue for me.
Go ahead, Courtney.
If you're making up your own cables, a lot of times you can't really afford to buy, 7 different colors of canary cable to keep the cables separate, but you can buy the little rubber boots that go on BNC cables and push them down and the same color, obviously, on both ends, and that way you can tell different cables apart by the color of the boot. If you're doing audio cables, then a piece of heat shrink tubing over where the cable comes out of the back of the connector with a specific color. One thing you may run into is if you hire assistants, that a large percentage of men are colorblind. Red-green confusion. So if you're telling them, get the red one and plug it into number 1, you may have the green one plugged into number 1. So just make careful to check with the people, make sure they're not colorblind before you start shouting colors at them.
And the other thing is that, so I do a mixture of both. Oftentimes I get colored cables. I order different colored cables, not lots and lots of them, but as you, so I use the resistor code a lot. And so as you use the resistor code with the rear twist cables, the Neutrik rear twist cables, which are life-changing. Anyway, so that's all I use. In fact, at some point I just purged almost everything I owned so that I only had these rear twists because it just drove me crazy to have to use a trumpeter. Anyway, so the rear twist, and they all have the colors. And then what I do is I might have multiples: gray, purple, blue, red, those types of things. You're multiplying the number of things you're telling with the cable colors. So you now have, so a lot of my little internal wiring can look very colorful because I'll have everything going in being blue and everything going out being red, to kind of tell me where the blood's going. Anyway, so those kinds of things I do pretty often. But what's nice about that is that I now can look at a cable without any markings and know a lot about where it's going to and coming from. If I pay that attention to that, I still then use, I'm sorry, Brady, but I use the P-Touch Cube Plus often to do that. But I just want to point out that for the most the finest labeling, I still use a Brady labeler. I have one too. They're so nice. You were going to say something, Courtney?
Yeah, I forgot to mention that for BNC cables, I came up, and you have a 3D printer. I came up with a design to print these little collars, and you were talking about the rear twist. If you have a lot of existing cables that don't have those Neutrik connectors on it, you can slide this over. This is printed out of TPU. It's urethane, and you can get it in different colors. So you can just slide this over. I heat it up where it becomes much more flexible. Slide it over the BNC when it cools off. Then it's got a hexagonal shape, so you can grab it from the back and twist it very easily to get those in and out. And it costs like 2 cents a piece, to print.
Without the time.
Well, I decided I say print at night. In the morning, I have 20.
You still have to put them on. It's in the.
That's true. You do have to put them on, but you don't have to take the connector off to put them on. That's the interesting thing. So that you can put them on any hundreds of cables without trying to disassemble or assemble any cable without solder.
I will tell you that it is if I know that someday we're going to move to IP, but still there's a lot of us still using SDI, and having the ability to make your own cables and and using those rear twists and the cable colors and everything else really changes a lot of things pretty quickly. So I would highly recommend that. Next question.
Kai Cochran in Seattle, Washington says, what was the best use of video marketing that you've seen or been a part of, and what was the impact of it?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Some years ago, I opened a studio that specialized in doing audio for video. And we were one of the first people to use what was called an AMS audio file, which is really excellent at spotting sound effects and things like that. So we had a big meeting coming up with the local ad club at the big theater. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to do a redo of the voices on a classic movie, old classic black and white movie? And we replaced all the audio on it with the different dialogue that supported working in our market. And I was like biting my nails, but the lights went down in the theater, the credit music came up, and the people started laughing right from the get-go and right through the end. So we became well known just by doing something for free and doing it very well.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I have seen often is just something really great about a product, and especially something about how to use the product as opposed to the product itself. So rather than telling me it does this and it does that and it's great and it's the best thing since sliced bread, just showing me like, so I will say that most recently the Nobe Omniscope, they have a bunch of videos on their YouTube channel on how scopes work, and they just happen to use their own product, but they're talking about them and they're incredibly well built. And it was the moment that I saw that I knew that they knew what they were doing, and I just immediately bought that's when I bought the software. Like I was just like, I was testing it and messing around with it and everything else. And I saw this series of and you just got that this is a passionate company about scopes. And they weren't sitting there. I don't know if they talked. I don't remember them talking about their product at all. I mean, other than it's on there. It's Time and Pixels is the company that makes them. But I just immediately bought it because I was like, okay, this is the direction that I want to go. And so using their products to do that is useful. I think that for personally, to go back to this, and I always find that educational content is the best marketing you can do. I did the Road to 1080p, which most people have heard about. This is the reason that I made it was because we were doing Mac Break. I'll show you some behind the scenes of that original day in the next hour. Doing Mac Break, and I couldn't get it to work. We had shot 444. This is 1080p 444. Back then, 225 megs per second was a lot to work with, and we couldn't get the composites done. And I had done something horrible, which was I put a green screen over the table, thinking I was going to replace the whole table, and that was in my ILM days, that's what we would do. But when you had to do a lot of it over, and the shots aren't 30 frames long, it's hard. So it was taking a long time. Leo was upset. I was like, I have to get something out. And so I just scribbled like, this is what we're thinking and this is what works and everything else. It was literally just a buy time. It took me about 10 minutes to do, and it talked about it. And it probably generated, probably the result of that was probably generated like $6 million worth of production work. Just that one little thing, because suddenly what I had announced was, without talking about it, I had announced that I have a 444 camera. And it turned out that I was the only one in Northern California that had a 444 camera, because I had bought the ones from ILM. So ILM didn't have them. And so it told everybody that I understand green screen. I have a great camera, and I can, do production with it, even though I couldn't do production with it at the moment. Then we ended up doing work for a whole slew on networks, Adobe, Revision 3, just tons and tons and tons of green screen, PBS. so tons and tons of green screen work from that one video, which was seen like 2 million times. Like it was not a small number. This is before the YouTube was really a thing. It was out, but it wasn't the same thing that it is now. Anyway, so I'll just keep on saying, coming back to build educational material about the thing that you're interested in doing, serve the market, and it usually will serve you. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Alex hit on it. Like, of course, the infomercial is the best video marketing out there, and Guthy-Renker is a company that's designed to do a lot of that stuff. And they learned long ago that you make an instructional video, or something like how to do makeup, or like the new Yankee Workshop, how to do home repair, construction, or different types of carpentry, etc. And you just happen to sell the tools that make that job easier. And so you make an instructional video that's showing people how to do something or create something, and the product that you're selling just happens to be used in that video, and then you offer them the chance to buy it at the end of the video. So it's your call to action always happens halfway through and 3/4 of the way through, but in the meantime it's an instructional video, so it captures their interest, and it's long enough to keep them hooked to want to do it and use the tools that they're using. Tool time. This was an unintentional one, but I knew somebody in Pennsylvania that they made these spoons, and the spoons had this little groove that you could set them on a pot, and it would hang the spoon over top of the pot. And they had a little company that made it. And this cook was on Oprah, and she's doing some behind the scenes, and she just happened it was one of those spoons sitting there. There was no product placement plan. It was just her kit that she just uses all the time. And Oprah said, "What is that spoon?" And she goes, "Oh, this spoon. Oh, this is amazing. It's just holding, and it sits over top of it." It almost killed the company. Like, there was so much demand, it almost like wiped the company out, because they just couldn't, they were like now, 12 months to build enough to get it caught up with the demand. So it's, there's nothing that replaces an authentic, like, this is a thing that we use, kind of thing. So anyway, next question.
Andre Dale in Berlin says, which HDMI-Fiber cables can the panel recommend for up to 100 feet?
Go ahead, Danny.
For that exact length, I have used those fiber HDMI cables, which I found for any long run. If you have to use a long run HDMI cables, you use those fiber types. It retains the color space. Your color stays vivid and stays sharp. The only thing you have to be careful of is the both ends, the heads. The cable in itself, you can step on it, they are fine. But you have to be careful on the ends, because if they get damaged, then there goes your cable.
Right. And those are single direction, right? You have to know which way you're going.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas, up next. With iPhone dongles and adapters have very short cable lengths, can they be successfully extended with a Lightning extension cable? And if so, any recommendations? Thinking no more than maybe 12 to 24 inches.
Go ahead, David.
I have a 6-foot extension cable I use in connection with a DJI Pocket Osmo. Amazon Deso Icon or something that's a generic but certified thing. It works pretty well, gives me the ability to have the control surface 6 feet away from the camera. And
yeah. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I've used the extensions if I had the phone or iPad put onto a tripod, because the dongles usually just pull down on the Lightning, and that can always cause destruction of the Lightning port. So I'll put the cable on, and then I'll make the nice little loop, and then I'll take a piece of Velcro and tie it onto the stand and bring it down, and that's where I'll put my extension. The other thing is make sure a powered extension I would trust over a non-powered extension in that case, or if your devices that you're plugging into can self-power, that will help as well.
Yeah, and I don't know what you're extending from. Rupert, what length are you?
Yeah, so we're like was just mentioned, we often talk about the dongles and adapters, particularly the HDMI one, and using the Apple specific one that you need to keep powered. I'm just trying to figure out whether that would work over an extension, and whether it would successfully power and negotiate and be just stable.
Yeah, because there are cables that are Lightning and they have a long cable out, and and I have just been dashed on those rocks. like it's just, I've gotten to the point where I just, all those cables, they're not Apple and they are painful to use. And I just went back to, I have to figure out a way to put the adapter right next to the phone, because I just couldn't get, I bought 6 or 7 of them, and they all have some weird registration. They've got firmware stuff in it that puts up a QR code that has to do the thing, that has to match it, and none of it all works all the time, and you end up in the middle of a show with a QR code. And it's just when we were doing the cooking stuff, I just went through cable after cable after cable after, and buying I bought one, it worked, bought 3 more, and then they stopped working. They get into weird states. So I gave up. I have a lot of Apple adapters, so maybe those will work, but I've not been successful ongoing, every day with them. Next question.
Rupert McRae's up next from Dallas, Texas, here on the panel, and he just says thoughts on Plex, I believe, streaming media service.
Go ahead, David.
I am a big proponent of Plex. I've been running it for years. I have the server running on an NVIDIA Shield TV. Data is stored on a NAS at my home. Share stuff with friends and family, all stuff that I've bought over the years. So I've downsized all the physical media, and it's on spinning discs. Pretty good stuff. Highly recommend it.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, you get to ditch the DVD shuffle, search by genre. The next episode is always queued. You get to return to a program where you left off. And you know that this thing is really a success when the significant other loves it. I've only got 16 terabytes out of 23 full so far.
That's great. Next question.
Simon Ray in Shrewsbury in the UK is back with, if you don't have a teleprompter, is it better to have a monitor placed immediately above or immediately below the lens?
Go ahead, John.
I prefer right below the lens. I'm able to move the content, so when I'm at home, I don't have a teleprompter, and so I have my camera placed right above my monitor. I'm able to put anybody I want to have eye contact with right there and kind of stare into it.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
This is what it looks like for me to stare directly into the lens through a teleprompter. This is the monitor slightly below the lens, maybe about 2 inches. and you can see I'm looking down. So it would be looking up if I put the monitor above it.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I've always had better luck with above.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So the issue is if you put it below, then somebody that's reading a script can actually see the lines that are underneath it, and that's an advantage. If you put it above, then of course there's no way to read the lines below it. However, if you put it flush to the lens, I always find that it's harder to read than if you put it behind a little bit, the lens kind of pushing it back. And in that case, putting it on top of the camera is the better option because you can actually move it towards the back of the camera.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I prefer above, and the critical point in eye contact is distance from the camera, because if you're not directly in front of the lens, the further away the talent is from that thing that they're reading, the smaller amount of their eye movement will happen for reading the text. In other words, that text will take up a smaller portion of their field of vision. So you won't see eye movement, and you won't be able to detect if they're looking above or below if you're further than about 5 or 6 feet back. I prefer aboves because it keeps the head up and it keeps a lot more light on the face. If it's down below, they'll tend to look down below the camera a little bit, and it causes more of a shadow issue, and it doesn't look like they're looking quite as much at the lens if they're looking below, I think.
Go ahead. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He says, when a supervisor or director consistently doesn't provide an agenda for meetings, how does one manage up and get one? How do you help foster effective meetings?
Go ahead, John.
I would offer to help organize the meetings. What do we want to get done with this? How do we move this thing forward? What are the things that are on your mind this week while we meet? And start putting together that agenda and really get into understanding where their headspace is, understanding what their needs are, and try to get ahead of them as much as possible.
And go ahead, Bill.
In the real world, all these things happen. I will tell you that I have gotten into modes where there are so many fires to put out and so many things happening that the idea of stopping the flow of getting ready for the meeting to do a get ready for the meeting drives me crazy. I mean, it just depends. If you're in a structured kind of normal flow circumstance, good, concise meetings really do bring the team together and help. But there are certain circumstances where I had a client once who used to say, why meet when we can shoot? I laughed the first time they said it, but I found that sometimes we got really, really good results with a good team just getting to work rather than having endless meetings about it. There are other times, depending on your analysis of your team and how good they are, when you really must get everybody on the same page, marking the same thing. And knowing the difference is, to me, what's important. Some people get so demoralized by endless meetings that it's a crusher for them, and they'd rather go be creative and work. But sometimes it's the other way. You have to, it's a judgment call, I think.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, a good thing to do is establish a template, which is the same template you use for every meeting, and categorize the different parts of the meeting. Like, we're going to have the CEO report, and then we're going to have the marketing department report, and then we're going to have the sales department report, et cetera, et cetera. And if you just make those, and maybe they don't have anything to report, but you use that template and go down those orders so that people know that they can expect to hear from or hear any updates on that particular topic at every meeting. And it makes it easier to organize. Old business first. Okay, we've finished with all old business. Now we're going to go to news business. Anybody have any new business, et cetera. And just that simple organization, without even being specific, of having categories that you can print up a list that whoever's hosting the meeting always goes down that list. And that way you don't forget anything or skip over anything, because you hit on each category and see if there's anything to come to contribute in each category.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Pardon
Can't
me.
hear you, Mitchell.
I'm a firm believer that most meetings should only take 30 minutes. And that forces everybody to have some kind of an agenda or have it very specific as to what they have to say. And you'd be surprised how much more efficient you can become.
I have a partner that's working with that uses Miro, and I'm starting to become quite a disciple of it. The ability to kind of set up what we're going to talk about. And we're having meetings, these hour-long meetings every day. and we're slowly working through things, and working with someone who actually knows how to use it. I think I opened it up and I was like, I don't know why I would use this. And then you watch someone actually organize thoughts with it. It's pretty powerful. So playing with that might be worth it. Next question.
Torgeir Slang. I'm sorry, I'm probably Tromsø, Norway, and I'm probably messing up the name. I apologize. I am searching for a camera backpack for traveling. What should I be looking for when I'm hiking and traveling with expensive equipment? Go ahead, Jason.
Excellent question. I've owned 3 of this particular unit. I love the ProTactic BP 450. I think it's the AW2 that's out now, but I've had the last 2 generations, and I've been very impressed.
Go ahead, David.
Actually use a Peak Design, makes some pretty good products too for cameras. There's another company I just stumbled across, Think Tank Photo. They have some pretty heavy duty bags. I didn't have a chance to get graphics up, but check them out if you can.
Both of those companies make exceptional bags. The only thing that I look at is I look for bags that don't look like photo bags. So, most of the time when I'm building a bag, I want it to look beat up and worthless. And there's I think Temba, makes some of those that look kind of like they're not bags. They look like they're just kind of so you just want to kind of look for, it depends on where you're going. But if I'm out and about, I like things not to be a huge magnet of I have an expensive equipment on my backpack. And I work in a lot of places where that is dangerous. Next question.
Bob Smith in Stanford, California says, in a live situation, how might one window into a 6 or 8K fixed camera to create a movable HD crop of the much larger native image?
So I don't know about 8K. They may have it. AJA has some hardware that will do this. And we used to do it with 4K to 720. So we were doing it, going to smaller things, and it was magical. And I just can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. But they may have, their region of interest is something that the ROI, the AJA ROI is something that's out there. And there is and I'm just trying to figure out what that processor was. But what was really cool about it is dealing with. It had a scaler, but it also had a hand controller, like a joystick, and it could save settings. And so you could save, like, I want this crop and I want this crop, and you can have it animate to those different things. And if we get a little later in the show and I remember what it was, or I search fast enough, it was really powerful as far as that goes. And again, we were doing 4K to 720, haven't done 8K to it yet, but I would imagine they're scaling up. Go ahead, Courtney.
I'd look at Decimator, because they made some, their little scalers, the Demon 4K, Demon 4, or Demon 8 that are designed to take multiple inputs or a single large input, put it to multiple outputs, have scalers, and you can program them to have a region of interest where you can move that crop around in a larger 4K image to output a 1080p image. And you can also do picture-in-picture, things like that.
Yeah, and one thing that you could also look at, and we could probably test this, I got to think about how to test it, is potentially using, I believe that you'll have very limited use of it, but in the Constellation is an 8K switcher. So it might be because I know the Constellation is a lot less expensive. And then if you're doing zoom and scales in the Constellation, but then bringing it back down to 1080p later, you may be able to, I don't know if the zooming, how the scaling up and down will work, or whether it'll work well, but that could be potentially a way to take an 8K image in and convert it, and then have a lot of, like, just DVE. You'll only have like one DVE, but that's all you need. So the Constellation could potentially be a great solution for that as well. Next question.
Vixenise in Lowell, Indiana says, I record live healthcare conferences using an atem to provide 2 feeds, slide and speaker, as picture-in-picture. Some speakers move around. Any suggestions for an HDMI camera that actively tracks the speaker?
Go ahead, Jason.
I feel like I've tried most, if not all of these, and I've never been thoroughly impressed. The Ronin gimbals, the most recent ones, do a fantastic job at this if you can lock on a face. The problem is if you switch speakers, it may very well end up just tracking right away. I would just get a camera op if I were you.
So a couple things. One is that game players turn out to be really good PTZ operators. You put a PTZ back there and have someone with a joystick. We had someone, I look back, we never considered our PTZs as a usable thing to track people walking in front. And I'm looking at this smooth track, and I look over, and it's a PTZ operator. I'm like, "Are you PTZing that?" He's like, "Oh yeah." And he said, "This controller is way better than a Sony PlayStation." so it was a different scale. You have to think about. It turns out they're much better because camera operators complain about the PTZs all the time. So you don't want to hire them. You want to hire game players who think this is really cool. Anyway, so the for PTZ specifically, black tracks is probably something you want to look at too. So black tracks, you could throw a tracker into someone's pocket and essentially tell the camera to follow it. That's what they do. That's what they're designed to do. So you would probably want to look at black tracks. Next question.
Stephen Montagna in Madison, Wisconsin, it says, after working in Final Cut Pro for many years, I have a gig requiring me to use Adobe Premiere and After Effects. Any good resource recommendations for getting up to speed?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Stephen, welcome to the dark side of Adobe. Premiere is simple. It's very much like anything else you've used, so you shouldn't have too much of a trouble doing that. After Effects, on the other hand, is a very deep program that's going to require some speed getting up. But what you can do is look at all the After Effects related programs or instructionals in Premiere, because it shows you how to integrate After Effects into Premiere using a thing they call Essential Graphics. It's probably your best approach to getting that stuff into Premiere from After Effects.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
So in Adobe Cloud, you have the ability to go into the tutorial section. Adobe actually has a whole host of videos that you can go through. You can also go to YouTube, of course, but the Adobe channel it'll take you to the Adobe channel where you'll see not only the high-end people doing different things and different tutorials, but also people learning creating YouTube style videos as well on that. I don't have much experience on After Effects, but if you need any help on that, since we're in the same town, feel free to ping me and I can try and help you out.
Go ahead, Bill.
Practice. Magnetic editing in Final Cut and track-based editing are two similar but quite different things. If all of your muscle memory is magnetic and you are forced into a track-based system, or vice versa, if all your experience is track-based and you're forced into magnetic, there is a learning curve, and particularly a reaction curve you've got to get over. So spend as much time cutting in that as you can between now and the gig. Try to build some muscle memory and understand which of your natural shortcuts are going to work, some will, and which ones are going to fail miserably, and try to figure out how to bridge that. It's going to be a struggle, but you can do it.
Sorry, I got lost in my thing. Go ahead, Courtney.
Linda, we used to be lynda.com, and now as part of LinkedIn, it's called LinkedIn Learning, has some good courses on After Effects, and you might start there. They have a 30-day free trial that you can get in and learn enough maybe before the trial runs out.
And go ahead, Chris.
I'd avoid the job myself. I'm just that way. It's a tough call, and I don't specifically know of somebody who has that transition away from magnetic to track based.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
One last thing, and that is inside of Adobe, just like I think with the other programs, you can actually change your keyboard layout to Final Cut Pro layout. That way, it'll help in what you're doing, and because you'll have some familiarity with the different shortcuts.
And Bill, I'm getting ready for the next thing, and I'm having a little trouble. So I'm going to let you take the next couple questions, and we'll run just a little bit over.
Yeah. So we're moving on. The next one comes to us from Dave Burke in Alexandria, Virginia. What's the oldest, cheapest iPhone model you think I can use as a webcam with Filmic Pro for Zoom? Let me get that out of the way, and John Wallace is going to start us off. John, go ahead.
The iPhone 8's the oldest one I would use. There was a big change in camera technology around then. I would recommend a 10 or greater. The sensors get even better. The 13, if you have one laying around, is obviously the best. But the iPhone 8 is going to do great.
Danny Law's up next.
Yeah, I'm using the iPhone 8 Plus right now, connecting directly to my M1, just using a plain Lightning to USB-A cable, and that's it, running from it.
Excellent. Rupert McCrae has our next question from Dallas, Texas. He says, when rooting or jailbreaking a phone is it a worthwhile endeavor? Many think of Android. I have one example, but I would like to hear of others. So is anybody in the jailbreaking community here? We have Rupert McCrae and Courtney Gooden, although I'm not putting you guys in that community unless you want to be there.
I was just going to give my example. I'm currently doing some work to really fine tune or analyze cell phone coverage. And it turns out that on Android, you can get some apps that give you really close control over the radios for doing that kind of analysis, but you do need to route the phone to do it. I don't necessarily kind of want to go down that route, but if I have to, I will. I'm just interested to hear whether there's any other benefits once I've done it, what else I might be able to do.
Fair enough. Courtney Gooden, do you have any wisdom for him?
I don't even know if jailbreak is even really necessary unless you're going to do something like Rupert was talking about, where you want to access the phone radios directly, etc. You know, it used to be necessary because the carriers would lock you into a specific carrier and you could not change that phone over to a different carrier, but because of recent FCC rulings, they are now no longer allowed to do that. As far as side loading applications, if you want to load an application that doesn't appear in the store for that particular Android phone or iPhone, there are apps out there like Downloader, which will let you side load applications, APK files that are not part of the, it can be dangerous. But I know I loaded I found a great player for YouTube that just eliminates all the commercials. And it even finds the red commercials or sponsored segments within a YouTube video and cuts those out and jumps right over them. But it's not available on any of the authorized websites, but you can sideload it using a program called Downloader, which is available on all of the stores. So look into that if you want to sideload programs. You don't have to jailbreak the phone.
Hopefully that helps you, Rupert. Moving on to Kyle Hammond in Chicago, Illinois. Is there a way to boost the Bluetooth signal on the 6K Pro? When using the Blackmagic Bluetooth Plus app, it works amazingly, but only at very close range. Jason.
Oh boy. I'm going to start just by leaving middle things just out there. Go look at what they're offering. Short answer is no, but if you spend a little bit of money on some pre-release hardware, they can do the next best thing, and oh boy, does it get neat. Also, they've got a companion plugin, and that's free.
Good answer. Great. We're moving on. Laura Thompson's up next from Texas in the U.S. For someone who is completely blind and a standard teleprompter would not work, what would you prefer the person at the lectern? Would you prefer the person at the lectern have something like a refreshable Braille display or an IFB with a human to prompt? And I've never been in that position, but I did spend my charity of choice that I spent a lot of years was recording for the blind in Arizona, and having talked to a lot of people, this is going to be an individual thing. I have worked myself, not being visually impaired, with ear prompters, and I find I can do that. Some people can and some people cannot. I would expect that a lot of people who are visually impaired have become very fluid at taking in information and multi-processing in that way. So I would suggest you give them a chance and see if an ear prompter might work. Courtney might have some other suggestions too. Let's move to Courtney.
Now, I was going to suggest ear prompter, and these days you can just create your own with just an in-ear IEM and an MP3 player that has a good pause button on it. So you can just, hit unpause it, listen to the next sentence, and then pause it while you say that sentence. And pretty soon you only need to hit the pause if it's suddenly getting too far ahead. And if you've recorded the speech ahead of time, it's pretty easy to match your own reading speed. Braille, of course, is I think that's what you meant by refreshable Braille display, probably Braille display. There are electronic Braille devices that have little pins that are operated by little solenoids, and they can actually scroll down so that you can read a line at a time on a electromechanical Braille display, and that might be a possible solution. Or to print out, or to have it printed out with a Braille printer, your script, and have them, if they do read Braille, that's another possibility.
Good point.
Next question.
Alex, back.
I'll take over. Sorry about that. Next question.
Fred Eric Echtert at Bad Herrenalb, Germany says Houdini announced their support for Apple Silicon. Recommendations for learning resources for the Houdini program.
Yeah, Houdini is an amazing package that does really powerful things, but it is, we always joke that learning it is it's as if it's just very difficult. it's like climbing Mount Everest, a couple times without any tools. So you definitely want to look for training for this. It is, I will say that if you master Houdini, it is something that there's a high demand for because it does things that no other CG package can do. So it's very, very powerful, but very hard to learn. CG Master Academy is actually not a bad one that's out there. You can also find tool training, I believe, in even lynda.com or LinkedIn Learning or whatever, as well as Udemy. Udemy will be less expensive. Lynda.com will be more structured, but CG Master Academy actually does a pretty good job. And also remember that there are learning resources on Side Effects website. So they have a lot of stuff, and they have some learning plans that make it a little less expensive to own to get started. So take a look for those as well. And now we are going to. I should have. Wait. We'll do it again. Ready? No black there. I was waiting for them to do a black and go to black again. I didn't give enough room. We're trying to work out this idea of queuing. So when I say, and now, no, they don't understand what I'm doing. Sorry. All right. So we're going to start our discussion about green screen. So last week, for those of you watching, I said, let's just open it up to questions. And there were a lot of questions. So we didn't get to actually me showing any examples. And so I'm just going to show a handful of examples and draw over them and talk about them a little bit. And these are just some kind of random behind the scenes that I grabbed from my collection of behind the scenes stuff. And so we'll talk a little bit about issues to think about as we start to go through it. So I'll present that for the next 10 minutes or so, and then we're going to jump into questions. So if you have questions about what I'm talking about or about green screen in general, it can be all over a green screen, but we're going to talk a lot about shooting green screen. And the reason we're going to talk about that is because it's the most important part. So there's a lot of keyers. Keyers get very close together in their feature set when you shoot your green screen well. When you shoot it badly, then you really need a good keyer and you need a really, really strong operator. I've shot thousands of hours of green screen. And so we slowly refined to a process of really being focused on how to shoot it, because it meant that I needed very little skill set on the other side and very little time, most importantly, on the other side to actually key it. And when you're doing 10 hours a week of footage, it starts to really add up. Small mistakes on set will kill you, kill your production. So let me cut to this. There we go. So here is, I'm just going to show you, these are just kind of some random behind the scenes, but I want to talk through some of the bits and pieces here. So this is the composite components. I didn't pick the best color for a green. Hold on, I'm going to change that really quickly. That's a funny problem that I use a green color for my normally to mark things up, and that will be very hard for all of you to see if I'm doing it over green screen. So let's change that, and we'll click here. So here is the green screen here. Now this is a composite components Lycra, and what we do is it's tied to a frame. So it's just stretched out to a frame. What we do is we actually put that green screen up, and then we spray it with water, just a little hand sprayer. And we spray it with water, and we walk away for 2 hours. When we come back, all the wrinkles are gone, and it's nice and even. You'll notice, and I'll show this over and over and over again, that they are keyed. I mean, they have key lights here, and then we have lights that are hidden back here, and I'll show that in more detail in a second. The other thing you'll notice is how much distance there is from them to the screen. Typically, if we're building one that matters and we have to do a lot of it, we're going to want 10 feet from them to the screen. And you may decide, I would rather rent, like if I'm charging someone to do hours and hours, I would rather pay for the rental of a larger space than squeeze into the space that was available to me. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a little later, because I think we have some questions coming up about that. You can see we're using large Kinoflow sources. And what we do is if you think about it from above, we are, let's see if I do this right. If you think about it from above, if you have a green screen here, and what we're doing is we have this light, and usually what happens is I have these two Kinoflows, and they're looking across like this. That's how I light it. So I'm not lighting. Otherwise, if you point them this way, you're going to end up with pools of light. If you go across, you can sit there and manage those much more effectively if you're shooting for the far corner as opposed to the near corner. So it's something that we've done a fair bit of there. let's go to another one here. Now this is a little bit more complicated because it was curved. And so you can see us still using that. And a lot of this is still figuring out where these need to go to make this as easy as possible. Again, this is a much larger green screen. Now what we did is, this is still a composite components, and this is why we like the Lycra, is that we just stretched it all the way around here to create that. And so that gave us a relatively smooth, it's not going to be as good as something flat, but it's a relatively smooth solution, for that process. Now here's a typical cove for a green screen cove here. And a couple things about coves in general is we use a lot of these mats, and that is an attempt to keep this as clean as possible. It typically gets dirty, and so we have lots of mats that we throw out. So when we're walking, if we're not going to see their feet, we want to cover it, cover the green screen. It also means that we don't have as much spill. So this area in front of them is a huge spill generator, and so you want to be very careful of not having too much of it in front of them. You'll end up with green, like really subtle green that you don't see in camera, but you do see when you're trying to key it. Now you'll see these are nice little curves. These curves have to be mathematically correct. And as a result, we don't try to make them ourselves. We have, and that's a horrible idea. I'm just going to tell you, do not try to build your own green screen cove. It is not worth it. There's a company called ProPsych in Portland, Oregon, and they will send you these as these fiberglass or and they have little slots for the. I mean, it's just really well built, and I've used them all over the world. So, and they make these corners are the hardest part is getting that absolutely correct. So we don't do that because it doesn't work well. Now here is the back end of one, so that you can see that these are what we call green. These are green Kinoflow bulbs. You can use gels as well, but these are actually green bulbs, and we do what we call green on green. Now the thing you have to be careful of is you don't want to actually affect the person here. So in here, we're using these barn doors to make sure that we don't, and again, distance to the person is a big piece of trying to keep that from actually being a problem. Here you can see another angle of this. And so you can see that the person is way in front of a large green screen, which makes it a lot easier to make work. Now, how big does this green screen need to be? One of the things you want to think about there, if we think about this, is when you think about the green screen, you think about the person. One of the things that happens is that this screen doesn't have to be that big, depending on where you can put your camera. So as you move your camera back, this screen, you're basically, you're zooming in more, and you're using less and less of the screen for the person. So sometimes the camera might be way far back, for what we're doing there. So that's another kind of thing to consider here. There's just a lot of math of figuring out what you need there. Now, this is something where we were shooting down. We weren't expecting to see much green, but we had to make sure that we protected for it. And this is one of the reasons we try to stay away from people's feet, is because you have all this contact shadow that is problematic, as you're shooting. And again, for us, most of our focus was on here, so we didn't have to worry about it too much. But we did have to make sure that there was a CG background that we were going to have. This was here is a kind of a very basic one here. And again, this is just PVC piping. Like, it's not like, this was back before I understood that I could buy frames that size. And so this is, again, a composite components stretched against this. And the PVC piping, we used to just go to any hardware store in whatever country we were in and just buy PVC pipe, put it together, and when we were done, just leave it in the room. Like, we didn't even bother to throw it away. We just leave it in the room, let somebody else worry about it. They could take it home if they wanted. And this is using all, again, this is large sources. This is for the person, and this is one of our early ones. But and then I think you can't really see. There's a hidden over here. There's the what's lighting the actual screen. Again, one of the things here, this is the same one you saw earlier. This was to do an Oculus thing for E3. Is the other thing that really sells green screen is the proper focal, figuring out your focal length and your position. This box, what we did is we worked with the game developer to build a box in their game that's exactly the same size with this hatch point in the game. The reason we did that is because when our box and their box matched, so they could just sit there, because they didn't really understand what they didn't. I just had an adjustment for focal length in the game, and I had an adjustment for position and everything else. And so we just move it around. And when these two boxes match, it means that camera is matched to the show, to the person. So, and that helps sell the scale and so on and so forth there. This is where things get complicated. There's a visual effects shot. This is where it's not going to be perfect. So you're going to end up in a much more complex situation where you're going to have a lot of drop off. The thing to remember is that about 80% of visual effects shots have rotoscoping. And so what you end up with is you're going to need to, at times, you're going to need, in this case, he was surfing on a floating board. And this is why we had to put him up high. And so this is where, and now you can see down here, I have tracker markers, and those are green tracker markers. And so I can more easily key them off, key them out. I don't need them to be that, unless I'm doing a heavy move where there's a lot of motion blur. I don't need these tracking markers to be very contrasty to the background, and it's a lot easier to pull them out later, kind of as we work. Here's just another cove. This is actually in Rwanda. So, but you can see this is the challenge with coves here, where it's very hard to get the green screen to be consistent across the entire piece here. But this is actually a ProPsych in Rwanda that we built there that we were quite happy with. Sometimes it's easier to just do this. so it's, you can see that I have a green screen here, and I would use it at times, but on a day-to-day basis in Insert Studio, I just put a monitor back there. This is actually from day one this is Amber MacArthur, and this is actually day one of the first Mac break in 2005. And you'll see these are the brand new, not brand new, the used, but brand new for us, the F950s that we had just gotten. And this was the mistake that I made, which is I was like, oh, in visual effects, we would just put this in there, and it just turned out to be a disaster. One of the big things about this was that anytime you have contact with the green screen, you just have to be super careful. That's where everything you have ambient occlusion, basically these ambient shadows that are happening. You have, spill, you have all kinds of things. And so this is the kind of thing that you want to try to avoid when you can. What we learned to do is put a desktop over it. And you'll see that if you look at a lot of Mac breaks, you'll see this kind of what we call the peanut, which is like this, I don't know, some desktop it's a tabletop that we bought at IKEA. And we think we painted it gray and put it on top. And then we had green below it. So it was easy to remove it. But we wanted to have the contact area actually be something that is real. And anytime you can do that, you want to think about that. Here's another one where you can kind of see another, we were doing this little music video. And you can see the lighting for them. But you can see that this is all lighting a nice area here. But we're covering everything because we decided we're not going to show their feet. And generally, you just have to understand that if you think about your camera angles, showing their feet touching the ground makes the shot 4 times harder. Like you just have to, and it doesn't mean that we never do it, but we think a lot about it before we do it. It is like, do you really want to do that? And so, and a lot of times you can shoot to someone's knees. But including their feet means that generally what you're going to end up doing is doing a separate key down here and then another key here. Then you have to make sure that the transitions work. And so that's a little bit more challenging. Here you can see another green on green in a very small cove. This is at, I think, NYU in the Tisch School there. And so we were doing a little web seminar. But again, lighting here with the green on green background and keys very well. So that's the basics of thinking about some behind the scenes. Here is, we're looking at this in Omniscope here, and this is a video. And so I think I can play it. See if I can, actually realized it played once, but I don't know how to do it again. Hold on. Let's see if we play it here. So this is is there a play button on this? JKL doesn't work. We'll have to talk to them about that. Anyway, this was shot in some of the early days of our you can tell early. I persuaded my my beautiful wife to be the host for this to be part of of this process. And so and I'm just trying to find I don't know if there's a play button here. Anyway, let me reconnect this to let's see, connect new source. Yeah, there's maybe someone can call out if they figure out where in Omniscope it should just play, but it played when I first added it, but it hasn't played again. All right, so we'll just talk about it as a still right now. Just trying to see. I'm sorry that I'm a little obsessed with that I can't figure out how to play a video file. All right, so A couple things you want to look at here. This is a pretty well shot green screen. And I will not set up anything that matters without scopes. So what you have here is what you're seeing is, number one, is it's green on green. That's why you can see this green here is really, really, high. And you'll see that this is where the green screen is in the red and so when you're looking at the scope, you can kind of see it here, which is that this is our subject here, and this is our green screen here, and this is the green screen here. So the green screen is very low in the red and the blue, and then it is very high in where the green screen is. And you can start to see these contrasts that become very useful, which is, again, very, this is the difference. Now, this is the Luma, and what I'm looking for here is in my Luma scope, I want to see this be as flat and as thin as I can make it. The thinner and flatter this is, the less number of different versions of green I have to cut. And the bottom line is when you think about this, all these edges are all that matter, right? And those edges have soft gradients between them, as you go through here. So there's all this little semi-transparent stuff. If you have to push the key really hard, you're going to get rid of all of this. And that's why people's green screens look very smooth around there, because you had to get rid of so many greens. We got rid of the greens that mattered by having it be something very specific. And you can see it. If you look at this, see where the green is living. The green is living really far away from everything else in the screen. Here you can see this big node of the green going right down the vector scope right here. And it's showing you that it's really accentuated, as it goes through there. And so this is the kind of stuff that you're looking for and you can even see it down here in the histogram where this is the green. So this is the only part that I have to cut out. If the green gets close to everything else, I have to cut out things that matter as opposed to the things that don't. So you really want to think about, that's why you want to be very careful and you want to be very picky, and you want to do it like my eye can look at this and make some decision about whether it's clean or not. But looking through it through a scope is very powerful because you go, oh, this is curved down, or or this is curved up, or these red and blues are closer to the green, and all those things are going to make it harder for you to actually get done what you need to get done. So I'll sit there. The most important one is this Luma scope. And what I'll do is, if I'm at a green screen, I will literally look at that. I'll have a monitor off screen with that Luma scope, and I will be looking literally at the scope and just moving the lights. So I'm just sitting there, moving my lights, and I'm looking at that line, and I'm trying to pull that line. I'm really flying by numbers, and I'm just flying, and that is 10 times more powerful than using any kind of spot metering, because the spot metering is right at that one location. I'm looking at the whole image, and I'm moving those lights around and watching that image move, and I'm getting it to just where I need it, so that I know that I can pump out hours of green screen without any trouble. And again, this is really thinking about training, corporate, like that kind of thing. In visual effects, it's an entirely different problem because you just get a lot of bad green screens and you rotoscope half of it. Like the green screen, almost like in many of these, the green screen, it's not that it doesn't matter, but it almost doesn't matter because there's so much rotoscoping that gets done that just does it by hand, because the green screen wasn't there. And again, places that you start to see it is that that's why I was trying to play the video, is that she moves her hands, and when she moves her hands, there's a lot of motion blur, and I can key that motion blur perfectly because I pinpointed the green that I need. I can get all the in-betweens and actually key them. All right, let's jump into the questions.
Our first one, Alex, comes from Dan Huber in Erie, Pennsylvania, and he says, does it help to add green light to your green screen background?
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yes. And the way it helps is because the fabric or whatever you're using for your green surface, if you're illuminating it with full spectrum light, there's a chance that there's going to be specular highlights, especially if it's a fabric that uses a polyester or an artificially made fabric, like other than cotton. It can have a little bit of a sheen to it, and that sheen will reflect all colors of light. So if you're lighting it with tungsten or something, it's going to change the color that comes off, and you'll get a broader spectrum of green if you're lighting it with regular light. If you're lighting it with a narrow spectrum green light, that really keeps your spectrum very tight. It's kind of like the bandwidth of the light that's being reflected is very narrow, and it's easier to pull a very exact key with a very narrow spectrum of green. That way you can also even shoot somebody if you've got green on the background. A lot of times you can shoot somebody with a Kelly green or a forest green shirt on without worrying about keying out that shirt, because the background is such a narrow, you can tune your key to such a narrow bandwidth of that green that it excludes other greens as well.
Yep, go ahead, Bill.
Just a tiny word of caution about that, because I've been in situations where my area to shoot in was so small that active generated green light would spill so badly back onto my talent that it made the key more difficult. White light on a green screen is subtractive. The screen is subtracting everything except the green to reflect back. Active green light can often bounce around so much that it really does infect edges. And so sometimes in small circumstances, I've found white tubes work much better than green. But if you have the room, they're fabulous.
Yeah, and I will say that, like, if you're doing your own green screen and you're kind of making it work and you're not worried about little hair details and all the little bits and pieces that come with that, then you would definitely use a white light on a green screen and it'll work okay. When you want to get the highest quality and make sure that you get absolutely every detail, there is a minimum size, and it's about 15 feet by 15 feet. And really, that's bare minimum. And really, you really want 20 by 30 is usually. So when a client asks us, well, how big does the room need to be? I'm like 20 by 30 by 10. like that's the box that I want to work inside of. And if they're paying me to do it, if I'm doing it at home, I might do something much smaller than that. If someone's paying me to do it, I'm not going to do it in less than that. Like literally, I just go, you need to find somebody else, because I don't have the time on the other end to be cost effective to do the key, and I just it's life's too short. Next question.
Laura Thompson in Texas comes up next with, in this world of Zoom and other virtual platforms, do you think the nomenclature between green screen and virtual backgrounds matters?
Go ahead, David.
Well, I think the green screen is the technology that allows you to do it. The virtual background is the thing that you're keying in. So if I tell Zoom that I don't have a green screen, it gets kind of wonky around there. And when I tell it that I do, it behaves a little bit better. Yeah. You can then turn off the background and turn it back on, and
and you're at the beach.
That's it.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Well, I also say that the sophistication of just the general public and understanding what this stuff is and what it does has exponentially increased. When I was starting in my career, only people who did weathercasts and TV stations could understand what green screening was all about. Now it's part of our general language, and I think everybody under the age of 90 understands green screen, at least reasonably.
And, the way virtual backgrounds are generated is oftentimes what we call a difference key. So it looks at what's different about, what are it's sometimes doing an AI to match your face and then looking for things that look like hair and then everything else, or it's just doing difference, like this is moving and that isn't moving. And it can make a variety of different, and it's getting better and better and better, but it's still pretty hard to watch, most of the time when it's doing a difference key. So the green screen works much better as far as, so I don't think they're interchangeable necessarily. Next question.
Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand says, as green screen experts, how would you cater for the Muppet, Kermit the Frog, in modern times, given that Kermit was a hand puppet? It's not easy being green, it would seem.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, for that one, you'd use a blue screen, not a green screen.
Yes, most of the time. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Unless, of course, you have Cookie Monster in there, and then you've got big troubles because he's blue and Kermit's green. And since Cookie Monster is more of a hairy puppet and Kermit is a very smooth felt puppet, I'd go with a different shade of green that was a little bit off of Kermit, and make sure you light it with a green light that is a similar bandwidth so that you could key Kermit out with a darker shade of green, because Kermit is pretty much made out of green screen material.
I would make Kermit blue, and then I would, with Cookie Monster, if we had a Cookie Monster issue, I would make Kermit blue and key them both in front of green, and then I would do a garbage mat around Kermit, and I would change his color to green. like that's and we've done that a lot. Like where we go, something's blue, and then we have control over it. We have a version of it built as a different color to make that actually work. But yeah, it's not just that Kermit's green; it's that he's very close to the real thing. And so I do think that David's right. Kermit by himself would be blue, but Kermit in front of Cookie Monster would be challenging. Now, the other thing you could do is you could cut the green screen in half. I don't know. The other thing to remember is that you could shoot them separately. Like if they're not interacting with each other, we've definitely done this where we've shot two different actors at two different times. In fact, while we're answering the questions, I might have that available. I can show you. But we literally shot them 6 weeks apart, and then came back and put them together. So I might try to show you that in a little bit. Go ahead, Bill.
I was also going to say I have used in a pinch red screen even, and chromakey means any color that you're turning transparent. I will say I'd never, ever, ever use that with any human beings because a lot of our skin tone comes from the blood subcutaneously. So red screen is a disaster for keying human beings. But in the world of pure Muppets, it might be, I got blue and I got green there. Let me try red and see if it works.
Next question.
The Seven Scroll in Brooklyn for shooting talent 6 foot and under, 6 feet tall and under. Roughly what size green screen would allow full body capture on set? Also add in the dimensions for the minimum width to pace as well, please.
Yeah. So as it's often said here, is it depends. So the main thing about the height is where the camera is going to be and how far back the camera is going to be. I've definitely put people in that are 6 feet high that the camera, I only had a 9 foot high screen by 10 feet wide, but the camera was 25 feet back, zoomed all the way in. That basically compresses that person against that background. So you want more distance there to make that happen. Go ahead, Courtney.
Also, remember you can garbage match. So as long as they don't go out of the top or out of the bottom with their feet, and their hands stay within the width of your green screen. If your green screen isn't wide enough, you pull back wide enough in your camera that you're seeing off the green screen on the top, bottom, left, and right. As long as your character is within the green, you can bring in a garbage mat. So that can limit the size of the green screen you would have to get to have a head-to-toe shot. Because a lot of times you can't, you'll put your green screen vertically, you won't have enough to cover the width of a 16 by 9 frame. So just bear in mind, you can always garbage mat stuff out as long as the people don't exceed the borders of the green.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I also want to emphasize something Alex brought up earlier, which I think is critically important. A longer lens farther back will allow you to push in farther, and you won't need as big a background as you get a camera closer and closer to your subject and wide enough to get any kind of full body or even half body shot. The angle means that your green screen needs to be bigger and bigger. One trick to not having to have huge green screens is to move a camera with maybe a 70 to 200 on it, push in on that, and then the amount around the person collapses down into the smallest possible area. So that's a way to cheat it sometimes.
Next question.
Fleety in Bali, Indonesia. Any tips on how to eliminate artifacts with ground level shadows when shooting talent top to toe on a green screen set?
Yeah, this is it's the ground level shadows. So the way that you often will end up doing this is you'll end up doing what we call divide and conquer. So if you have a person, you're going to see that their legs are down here. And as you can see that this is very, very bad example. Anyway, you want to, oftentimes you'll key this area as a separate key, and then you'll key this area as a separate key, or sometimes this area and that area. And the bottom line is that the places you have to worry about are the transitions, but you'll do this as a separate key to try to grab that data that's out of there. You want to try to get that as good as you can. Now, the other option that some of us do is also we nowadays oftentimes will just key really hard and get rid of those shadows, and then reproduce them digitally. You can actually it's very complicated, but you can put a character in there to generate those things, and especially if the person isn't moving. If they start walking around, it just adds a lot to the detail. So again, this is something again that we do, but we try to avoid when we can. But if we're going to do it, it's going to be something that we try to keep them stationary. And if they are going to move around, then again, with visual effects, you can do anything. But if you're talking about doing a promo event or doing something else you have to kind of really think about, how much this is going to cost. And cutting them off at the knees will oftentimes save you, an enormous amount of work. And so you just have to really think about it. It's not that you can't do it, it's just that you can't do it quickly or well. Next question.
Well, the next one comes from Rupert McRae, but it's pretty much for Chris Fenwick, and he's not here now. But he says, explain the silhouette method for checking green screen lighting.
And yeah, I don't know exactly what he means by that, or what his method is for that. So we'll have to wait for that. Next question.
Ketengel Fla, I guess. Gersvold of Tromsø, Norway. And again, I'm sorry for any pronunciation problems. Any tips to instructing actors that have never been on green screen before? We've had a lot of people gesticulate furiously, which we've had to make them tone down in order to get the best results.
I will argue that comes back down to a really, really great green screen. You know, they can move their arms all over the place if the green screen is clean, or if you have a good roto artist. So, but it's not. We try not to tell actors as best we can, you know, to not emote when they're there. But those are. But it's that clean green screen gives you a lot of. We don't think that much about them moving quickly if we have a good clean green screen that I've illustrated earlier. Next question.
Next one comes from Kenneth Jones in Seattle, Washington. What's a good source for figuring out all that math? Green screen width for a given distance with a given field of view and so on.
So a lot of that has to do, we pre-visit. So it's less math and more, I mean, it is technically a field of view. So it's calculating the field of view of the camera and then looking at the distance of where that field of view is going to be. So if you're going to do a 35 millimeter or 50 millimeter, you know, or a 50 degree or 25 degree field of view, you can easily put that on a camera and figure out that 25 degrees and then extend it, pull the camera back until you can see the screen. And now you know what that is. So I have to admit that I do less math about it and more of I build visual examples that I can move around so I just build a cone that is, or a pyramid that is 25, has a 25 degree FOV. And then I pull it back until the wall is safely inside of that frame. And then I can start figuring out everything from there. Next question.
Ronnie Holmsey in Tromsø, Norway says, affordable green screen keyers for live multicam production that is better than atem, getting SDI 4K out of the 6K Ursa Broadcast G2.
There is no affordable green screen that is better than the, green screen keyer that I think is better than the atems. Right now, the atems that are able to take, I guess it would be the 4ME and above. I don't know of any other affordable green screeners for live multicam that does that well. I mean, potentially you could use things like OBS or other things that have green screeners built into them. But you're going to have delay and everything else. As far as hardware goes, there's not a lot of good places to do that, in my opinion. Especially if you're doing multicam. If you're doing multicam, you've got a lot of inputs. You got to figure out how you're gonna do that. So, yeah, I don't know of a lot of affordable. I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I have a high expectation of that. But green screen happening in real time. I guess the most affordable one would be a computer with Unreal. Unreal's got some relatively good keyers that are built into it that you might be able to use for that. But the atems, and I would definitely not buy one yet. I would wait. I'd wait until NAB at this point because I don't have any inside information, but I really feel like we're going to see SDI switchers that are less expensive from Blackmagic just because they're missing. Like all these ones from $1,000 up to $10,000 all need to be replaced. So I would wait for that. Next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois. What do you think of the reflect media approach where a green light is at the camera lens reflecting on a gray background? Advantages and disadvantages.
I go with Courtney.
It's not a gray background, but it's a retroreflective background, which is a specific type of surface that reflects an amplified amount of light back directly into the angle of incidence of the source of that light. So that means that you've got to have a ring light around your lens, and it has to be a green ring light to reflect off that. It looks gray to the eye if you're not directly in line with on axis with the source of the light. The thing to watch out about that, and it does work because although you're lighting up your subject with green light in that green ring light that's around the lens, the fact that there's amplification going on in that light because it's focusing, and that retroreflective screen behind them is focusing all the light that falls on it right back to a single point, which is at the center of the source of that light. So the thing you got to worry about is if you're going to light, if you have a person with deep socketed eyes like mine and you want to get some light into there and you want to put an OB light or something near the lens, any light that you get near the lens will wash out that green background light and cause a problem and reduce the quality of your green screen. So, and the other problem is you can't have any type of reflectivity on the set because that green light will reflect in glasses or shiny objects, etc. So there, and plus the retroreflective screen is very delicate, as we spoke about it before. You can scar it and ruin it with, if you just brush a C-stand across it or something.
Yeah, Bill?
Yeah, my keywords are faster, simpler, fragile, and I've never really been a huge fan. The material, if you accidentally leave the material on the floor and step on it, you ruin it. And it's very expensive per square yard. So it's not an inexpensive solution to go that way. It is quick and simple to set up. I mean, you really don't have to think about your lighting at all. Slap the lens on the camera and you're good to go. But I've never really gone, wow, that looks like a Reflect Media type key because it's so good. So I just think the result is okay and certainly faster, but I've never used them for that reason.
In a controlled environment where you can just put them up and leave them up and you can protect them as that was the number one thing I think I talked about last week was someone scraped up against it and that was the end of scratching all of our keys after that. So you have to be kind of careful with them. For an unskilled operator to do lots and lots of weather style keys or basic e-learning keys, it's pretty effective because it just comes out perfectly set up and you can just key lots of stuff. So for mass production of reasonably good green screen, I think that the Reflect Media does really well. It's kind of that middle of the mark. It doesn't take the operator very much. The problems you get into are fine issues related to the penumbra, which is if you're too close, you'll let the person cast a shadow on the background, creates a little edge. And you also have occlusion issues that can happen where it's not getting to the green screen and you have these weird fades that occur. And so those are the two things that we had trouble with. And we found that if you really know what you're doing with green screen, the Reflect Media is not that interesting. If you don't know what you're doing or you have lots of interns or students that are doing it, pretty good. Like it works pretty well. Give them a room that's set up for it, and they can key it quickly and live, and you don't get all the hair detail that you were hoping for, but it works well. It's not a disaster. That gets into when we were doing a car wash one time when I was in high school, and they had a guy came in just for fun and let us very carefully wash his Ferrari, and I got into the car and. I got to drive it home to his house, except I didn't because I stalled it 3 times trying to get it open because Ferrari is much more sensitive than a tractor. And so I kept on dropping the clutch too fast and installing it. And the reason I say that is because what we're talking about sometimes is that we have these high-end sports car ways of doing things. And if you're good at that, then that's a great thing to use. If you're not good at it, it'll wrap you around a pole really quickly. So you just want to, always, you want to look for everything has a good use in its own place. So easy corporate or education, the Reflect Media is pretty good as long as you protect it and put it in a room that's designed for it. Next question.
Craig McFarland, Boston in the U.S. For green backdrops, there is such a wide range of pricing from under $100 to many thousands. What are suggested sources for lower cost that has the optimal green? And he's looking for about an 8 by 10 foot. So I know that I just want to make sure it's clear. I don't get anything from Composite Components to tell you that I've been using their screens for 25 years. It's the only thing I'll use as far as a screen goes. If I need a new screen, I go buy it from them. I don't, at that price, especially at 8 to 10 feet. So there's lots of little pop-ups that you can use. But at 8 to 10 feet, I don't think there's anything competitive. It'll cost you $300 or $400. It's not super expensive. It's not super cheap. And it's just way better because the thing, anytime you deal with green screen, and you just always want to calculate time. How much time is it going to take someone to pull a good green screen from your screen thing? Do never buy a screen on its retail value. Always buy it on time, because if you might save $300 or $400, and then you'll spend thousands in hours, to pull the green screens. Go ahead, Bill. I was going to say there are companies like Westcott who manufacture specific green screens and frames for them. You can get them, 6 by 6 is pretty normal, 8 by 8, even up to 10 by 10. they're not to the level that Alex is talking about with custom building one and really knowing what you're doing. But for a quick corporate, lay up a green screen and make it work, they can be useful.
And I can say that I part of my hardened opinion about this was that right before the pandemic started, I was unemployed and wasn't willing to buy a composite components. And I just bought some Westcots and I bought a couple other things for $35 and $40 or whatever. And I started trying to pull green screens from this. And I was like, this is worthless. like I am never going to use these screens. I threw them away. Like I was just like, this is not like and I just went and bought more composite green. Like I just was like, this is not acceptable, And then the other thing is that, by the way, with the other ones, you can wash them. So you can throw them in the wash. They won't fade.
I will say my Westcott rig was about $350. And so some of the bigger ones are a little better than that, but they're not pop-ups, but I get your point.
Same fabric though. It's just more hardware.
No, actually it's not the same fabric. These are really thick and they have green and blue back to back with Velcro ties on the ends. They're decent. They're not fabulous, but they're definitely decent.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana says, would there ever be a use case for keying using projection or a video screen behind the talent? And would this provide for good chroma keying?
We've done it. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I did it all the time, and especially in situations where we'd have monitors. In fact, I wrote a green screen program. Oops, that's not it. But here it is. That has you can turn circles on. You can turn witness marks and make them a different color of blue or green. Oh, I got to get on the right screen here, so that you can show crosses and you can move them. You can put up a grid, and it, of course, being electronic, it's completely even. You don't have to worry about lighting it, and as long as it covers your person behind them, it's great. And my application that I wrote, you can also adjust the brightness, and it generates 100% pure green, and it only changes the luminance of the green, so you can dim it down and bring it back up without adding any different colors to it. So it makes a pretty good green screen, and it's great for putting on monitors that they have to track and paste in images on later, because it's even and it's green, and it makes a good electronic source. And you can move the witness marks around if you need them, and you can make them any color that you want.
Yeah, and so I was going to say is that the for screens that works really well, and especially screens that someone's going to work with, like someone's tapping on a touch screen and everything else, and you might have some little tracker markers. And I really wish I knew that Courtney's existed, because that's always been a thing. Like, how do we build the images to put the tracker markers and do all the other things? And it looks like you can just do it with his. So you have to worry about brightness, because you get a lot of spill, especially if you're going to touch anything or if you're going to be close to it. And it's a lot brighter than lighting a green screen, because it's emitting light as opposed to reflecting it, and so it tends to be it tends to be there, but it absolutely works, and we've used it for insert studios as well. And the one thing you want to be careful of is LED walls at the wrong distance can be really hard, because they still have the moire, and they still have a lot of other things that you have to now struggle with. So people think that will work, and it does some of the time, but not all the time. And not all the time is the thing that gets you. Is that, and so nothing works all the time, but you have to be kind of careful with it. But you can absolutely, do the chroma keying that way. Yeah. Next question.
Tommy Shantz in St. Paul, Minnesota says, "What is garbage matting?"
Bill.
So in layering things, you often want to take one graphic and superimpose it on top of another. The mat is cutting out something that's transparent over one image so it can be placed on another. Garbage mat usually means that you can set various key points, and the mat will create lines between those points so it can be irregular. Garbage mats are a really quick way to take something irregular and create a mat around it so that it can be keyed over something else.
Yeah, a lot of times what happens is we have a green screen, and what we want to do is we don't want to worry about. So, for instance, if you look at my image here, imagine that what's behind me is green, and what I would have to do is like this stuff doesn't matter, this stuff doesn't matter, all that. I don't want to use up my green screens. You want to be very stingy about what greens you use up. So if there's a vignette out here, I don't want to be throwing away a good green for just to key this vignette. So what I'll do is I'll actually build a garbage mat that looks like this over it. And basically all of this just gets thrown away. It gets thrown into the garbage, right? And now the only thing I'm keying is the areas right around me. So the only greens that I'm using are along these edges. And so that helps you a lot, because it means that if you had any vignetting, which is very typical in a green screen, you have any vignetting around it, the quality of the green may be a lot better around you. You also may have other things around you, like there might be a microphone right here, because we knew that we were going to key it out. So there might be a light that's right in this frame. And so what we'll do is we'll garbage mat that out. And so garbage mats and sometimes you're animating those garbage mats because they're doing. Now, another way to do this is do what we call procedural garbage matting. So a lot of what we do here is we'll pull a key right around a person like this, and then we'll do a maximum. And what it'll do is it'll pull this edge out, a max filter. It'll pull the edge out, and it's actually animating along with the person in that area. And then we do another key and we minimum and we pull it in. And so now the only part we're keying is this little edge. We know that this is all black. We know that this is all white, or vice versa. And we're only having to worry about this edge, and it's animating as the person's moving. And so that's what we call a procedural garbage mat, a procedural core mat. And so we can pull those mats, we make them high contrast, blow away everything we want to, pull them in, sometimes blur them a little bit so that they'll fade in and out well. And it can save you a lot of trouble down the path. Next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama again says, do you focus on keying out afterwards, or would you do it live?
For anything that matters, we generally key it live to know what we're doing, and then key it later and properly. And in fact, I can show you some examples of that. I found some of the images that I was talking about earlier. Let's see here. Cut to this. Yeah. And then, so what you can see here is, let's see if I can get my mouse in the right focus. There we go. So this is a composite. This is we shot this in Japan, the foreground in Japan, the background in Santa Monica. And so here's the green screen that's there. Little things that make this work. Number one, obviously camera angles and so on and so forth, but also his hair's moving. See his hair blowing in the wind. And that's literally someone with a piece of cardboard swinging up and down. You'll see it here. There it is. He's got a little flag that he's blowing there. And this is in a university in Japan. Now we're keying that live to make sure that that it was working, and we were literally keying it in front of the background that we had shot 6 weeks earlier to make that work, to have that work there. And then there's the background that we shot inside of in Santa Monica. And then here's the shot for the final shot for the movie. So that's the and again, the blowing of this hair is a really key piece of that, and it worked pretty well. This is a good example of one that was shot again. We carefully did not shoot their feet. They are shot actually. They're together, but shot 6 weeks apart again. So we couldn't, or maybe 3 weeks apart, because we couldn't get it. So he's talking to her stunt double, and then she's talking to his double, and then that's the key. And then that's the background in Santa Monica, and then that's them being placed back into it. So, as let's see here. I don't know if this is a green screen there. I don't know if I thought, I think I talked about this. There's the green screen there. We did about 100 of these shots. This is the interactive lighting. Here we go. Interactive lighting coming up. Wait for it. There it is. Going with the lights going by. So that all that interactive lighting helps sell that. There's the background shot that we shot out of the back of a van. There's the foreground reflection that goes in front of it, and then that's the final shot there. That one's not a green screen. This one, this is one of my favorite ones that we did, and that's the last one I'll show you. So that's her in Japan in front of that green screen. Not as good a green screen, so there's some roto here. That is Terminal 2 in LAX. So we shot that. And what was the funniest part of this was this dude, was not part of our shot. Just so you know, the dude, we're shooting. We got a whole bunch of cameras. He just walked in front of our camera. It turned out to be a happy accident because it really sells the shot. So we rotoed him out and put him in front of her right there. And then that kind of makes it feel much more interactive. But you'll see that we did have a flag over her if you go back. So you can see that she comes out from the we thought about the fact that and we actually shot the background after the foreground. So we knew that she had to come out. So we had to really kind of figure out the camera angles. But the guy walking turned out to be useful. Anyway, so those are some visual effects versions of that of what we were talking about earlier. I hit the wrong button. Anyway, so let's go to the next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama says switching green screen and ATEM Mini can only be done with chroma key being applied to each source every time you're switching.
Yeah, it's hard. Like it's not like it's multi-camera keying is not and with the ATEM Mini you only have I think one key there. So you have to the way you could theoretically do it. I haven't tried it with the Mini, but with other switchers, you need a different key for each person, and then you have to track those things together. I think that you could theoretically, if you played with it, I've thought about this, is that you are being able to edit, and you're jumping to a different Unreal camera before you cut. So you could literally make that work. I think you could do it with a Mini and Unreal with multiple outputs or even a single output from Unreal as a background. I just haven't done it. It works in my head. Go ahead, Courtney.
Doesn't the Mini, I don't have one, but maybe you could tell me, doesn't the Mini Extreme have the super source offer 4 keyers with the 4 sources?
I think that the Extreme does. I think he was asking about the Mini, but the Extreme you may be able to do more effectively with that. The key is the people can't move. You can't move the cameras. You have to keep them locked off if you're going to do those things because you have to match the background up with them. We should test it. It's something that I haven't had time to work on. Next question.
Lenny Nelson in San Antonio up next. With LiDAR, are there any technologies being made that can use depth to key?
So we've played a lot with depth in the past 25 years. People have been playing with keying using the depth maps. The problem really is the semi-transparent edges because it doesn't know where they are. It doesn't, and so you end up with these kind of hard edges, aliased edges, that type of thing, because anything because you don't think of your hair as semi-transparent, but it is. It's got, and so it doesn't really, in fine detail, LiDAR, the problem is the resolution of the LiDAR is generally not the same resolution as the image. And so, because that would be expensive. And even then you have semi-transparent edges. Motion blur is a real problem for LiDAR because you're there and then you're not. So those are things that become particularly challenging. We do think that eventually, with all of this, eventually that type of technology is going to catch up and actually be able to do this and build that out. But it's not been, I haven't seen anybody do it successfully in an actual production. Go ahead, Courtney.
There's another technique besides LiDAR that can be used for keying, which we haven't talked about, is difference keying. Is if you have a static background and you take a still shot of the static background, and then you shoot that same background with the person in front of it, and then the key just does a difference between the static background without the person in front of it and with the person in front of it, and you can pull a key that way.
Yeah, and it works pretty well, but if you have a lot of pixels that are the same color, it doesn't work as well, same color in the foreground and the background. The other thing you always want to do, if you're going to do a green screen, always shoot a clean plate. So it's where it is on the green screen, walk out of the frame, or before the person walks into the frame, right before that, so that nothing changed. And you capture a couple seconds of that frame, and then you bring it in. And you can use basically a screen selector that basically will use that green, use the fall off of the green, the imperfections of it to actually correct the screen, which will greatly improve your key. In fact, long ago, I don't know if they still do it now, in iMovie, you might want to try this. I mean, the older iMovies, you could take a pin and put it on a green screen. You'd take a pin and it would use that automatically as the clean plate. I thought that was a really good idea. Anyway, next question.
Andre Dalle in Berlin again. The long time I wasn't aware that HDMI supports 444 processing, but SDI only 422. How does the cabling influence the keying, and wouldn't HDMI be a better choice, maybe over fiber?
You can absolutely do 444 over SDI. so you can. So SDI can support it. It just depends. It depends on the links and so on and so forth. But you can. SDI will definitely support 444 as well as 422. It's more common for SDI to only support 422, but it's absolutely possible for it to support 444. Next question.
Walt Palmer in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware says, other than size requirements, is there any advantage of paper versus plastic or polyester for green screen material?
Yeah, mostly wrinkles. So wrinkling and the pull when you're pulling them tight, just all the little wrinkles that appear, of the stretch is really hard to deal with when you're dealing with cotton. Go ahead, Bill.
Also, if you're working with paper, there's two sizes generally. There's like a 7-foot roll, but there's also a 10-foot roll. Those 10-foot rolls are really difficult to work at. I mean, you're trying to get a wider thing. I've tried to use them for green screening or even luma keying before, and they can be a hassle. Unless you're really well set up for those 10-foot rolls, they can be a problem.
Next question.
Brian Thomas in Antigua says, for a media house, would you recommend blue or green screen given the size at 40 feet by 20 feet?
Generally green. Like, unless you have a real reason to go blue, go green. The reason is that like 60% of the image in a digital video, any digital video is the green record. So the bottom line is you have way more data in green than you do with blue. There are reasons to do blue, but you'll find that if you just take an average shot and you go through the different channels, you're going to find that blue is the noisiest. Like, just tons of junk is down there. And so it's always harder to do it. Now, for night shots, green, blue is going to have a more pleasing spill than green does. For things that are green foregrounds, then you want to use blue. Sometimes you want to use blue screens. But outside of that, you always want to do green. Now, next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama, can we key green screen live to output alpha transparency and have transparent videos to use afterwards?
Yeah, you can. You should be able to output that when you're doing the key. Oftentimes, you can show output just the alpha channel. You can show the alpha channel going out. Definitely with a lot of the software, it'll push that out, as well as like an Ultimate will definitely push that out. But you could also just throw the key in and key a black or white image, and it will key it out and just send that out as program. So you could use it later. The biggest problem with keying green to use later is to make sure that it matches up with the original. It has to do frame by frame. So you just have to make sure that, like, so for instance, if you're going into an atem switcher and it's doing some kind of conversion, you could get into an odd place where it's not exactly the same. The frames aren't exactly the same as what was coming out of the camera. And you can end up in a situation where there's just it doesn't take very much for that key not to work. So you want to make sure that it's native all the way through. Go ahead, Courtney.
And if you're going to be recording that key signal output, make sure it's not a compressed format that uses long, GOP, so it'll get blocky around the anti-aliasing edges between the black and the white, and that can cause for a noisy key or noisy edge. So make sure it's recording full bandwidth and not doing a lot of compression.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem. The 411, 420, those types of things that we see in a lot of cameras that are outputting something from a DV or some digital output, or if you're on the other side and you're trying to key it through Skype or something like that, it's not gonna be a great experience for you. So the other thing to always remember is that if you're gonna do it for post, if you're doing it live, you're kind of stuck. If you're gonna do it for post, you generally want to turn your sharpening off because what sharpening does is it accentuates all sensors, because they're all CMOS sensors, not CCD, but CMOS sensors, have the pixels aren't all on top of each other. Red, green, and blue aren't on top of each other. They are on a they're slightly offset, which means all images are somewhat blurry.
A Bayer matrix, yes.
The Bayer matrix, yeah. And so they're somewhat blurry there. So you have to be kind of careful there. So what happens is it looks at an edge and it says, this edge is, I have an edge that is lighter and an edge is darker. It'll make the darker edge darker and the lighter edge lighter. And usually what happens is in green screens, you'll see a white edge that goes along a person. And that's very hard to key because it's white. When we first started, we were like, why can't we key this? And we realized the sharpening filter. So you want to be very careful of trying to turn sharpening off if you're trying to do high end. You can always add that sharpening back to the end of plate. So keep that in mind. All right. Well, that was a buzzsaw of information. So hopefully that was useful for everybody. We'll probably come back to it. A lot of people are doing green screen for a lot of things. And so maybe we'll come back in a couple months and answer more questions as people continue to go down that path. Thanks to our producers, lots of great questions, both in the first hour and the second hour. We spent a little more time. We slowed down a little bit this week because there was just good questions to chew on. So we don't have any hard number. If you ask a lot of good questions, we'll just keep on working on it there. Definitely thanks to the panelists. We can't do this without you. And David, I think your key is probably the best green screen key I've seen. In Zoom, because you're just using the Zoom,
Yeah. the Zoom key. I tell it that I have a green screen, and like I say, the lighting in this room, it's around 3200, but it's all overhead stuff. So, but it's the luck of the Irish.
Yeah, well, I think that it's also, one thing that we didn't talk as much about as that we probably should have is, again, paying attention to your camera angles and the fall offs and the vanishing points of matching that background is really, really important. But anyway, just want to point that out. So Dave, thank you to all the panelists. Lots of great answers here today, both in the first hour and the second hour. And we're just, it keeps on tightening as a show. And thank you to everyone behind the scenes. I don't have the list all in front of me, but thanks to everyone behind the scenes. There's a huge group. If you're watching these things, there's a huge group of really committed individuals that are making this happen. It's not just us here on Zoom doing things. There's people managing the edit, and they're managing the graphics, and they're building these things in between, and they're getting in early, and they're going. It's an amazing resource. So anyway, so thanks to everyone in the background as well. All right, we will now jump in. By the way, remember, great lighting thing next week. It's going to be live from our stage, and Tlaloc is going to be running it. That's tomorrow. It's tomorrow morning. So anyway, you definitely want to be here for that. All right, now we'll jump into After Hours. I wonder if we're going to get credits this time. Oh, look at that! All those people doing all those things.
Brady, it's a name you can trust.
And we'd like to thank the little people here.
Look at all the people that work on this. This is amazing. I don't think there's another webcast. This many people working on it. Anyway, all right. Now we're waiting for the logo to come up. It seems like we've gone to black, but there's a logo that's going to pop up here, we think. Or not. Oh, there it is.